Hi chess friends, this is King's Executor showing you a very nice Alekhine game in the recommended variations after e5 and d4, d6, knight f3, and pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn, and now the Miles variation. And the idea of the Miles variation, let's just drop back. In general, we want to exchange off this central knight. But if we do this immediately, there could be a sacrifice, queen check, and now we have to play king e6 in order to keep the knight. And this might be a little uncomfortable for black, and you don't want to really prepare against any possibilities that might arise here, because there are endless variations. So let's go back to this position. If we want to exchange the knight off without allowing the sacrifice, c6 is good, because now the knight is protected. And after a queen check here, the knight isn't attacked, and the king is safe with a move like g6, bringing out his bishop as well. Let's just see it. g6, for example, and if check, you can go back with your king and activate your bishop and enjoy your extra piece. So, knight d2 was white's move, and now we can exchange off the knight in full comfort. And bishop f5. Well, we managed our plan. We want to play e6 maybe at some point, and we want to develop our light squared bishop before bishop to d3. And then we wouldn't have this square, we wouldn't have this square, of course not this square, and e6 is a little bit uncomfortable for the bishop maybe. So in order to have it on a very active location, we play it to f5 immediately. In the Alekhine, we want to activate this bishop early on before you get too passive. g6 to open up this bishop's development route. You also could consider e6, and afterwards bishop maybe here would be probably safest and best. But with g6 you have a very nice diagonal pressurizing the center, so you can decide. Well, now queen c8 is a nice move by black. By the way, this is a game from the Tradewise Gibraltar in 2013, and white is Claus Seyfried with the ELO rating 2177, and black is Gudmundur Kjartansson 2408. And you see, this is a real model game of the Alekhine in the Miles variation. And if you know Grandmaster Igor Smirnov's channel, there he says to take is a mistake, so black rather lets his pieces get developed through capturing than taking on the enemy's pieces immediately without a reason. Castles, bishop g7, bishop d2, getting out the rooks here, castles, and you see black's position is fine. What black's goal is now to somehow get counterplay. and the best way to do this is to somehow get c5 in. Exchanging of central pawns, freeing up the black position, and well, after that black would have an extra, maybe an extra central pawn, maybe not, according to circumstances. But I think black is a little bit more flexible with his pawn structure. Of course, white for now has the spatial advantage, but it's not a real factor of an advantage here. It's, well, black is ready to equalize with the move c5 soon. Rook f8, and now Kjartansson took on d3, seeing no reason of letting white have pieces in the center. And now e6 to block that rook's file. Of course, d5 is now, the square is overprotected, so if c4 to kick the knight can drop back somewhere, and these pawns are controlling d5, so there is no easy breakthrough for white. Black's position is very comfortable. Knight back, and you see h6 is on the menu. Queen c7 to get it on the open diagonals. Bishop here, this was taken, check, and knight back. So white is just exchanging off pieces, moving back and forth. This only helps white. Of course, now having exchanged the bishops and having here a knight plus a queen plus a potential rook, of course not now, but after kicking it, a potential rook here and maybe here, then there might be some action, but this takes time, and black meanwhile can easily develop a nice defensive position, getting back here, exchanging off pieces, in the worst case rook here, but there's nothing. This is really an equal position, more or less. Queen f4, rook e4, queen back, knight here. The difference between having space advantage and for the side that doesn't have it is that white was able to introduce his rook to the game, and black isn't able to do the same because of its rather blocked but solid pawn structure. But 3 to 2 pieces are not enough for white to have an advantage or an attack. Rooks to the open files, and now you see the knight has a nice job on f6 controlling central squares, and now we get our thematic c5 push in. This is really the moment in the game where black has equalized. Maybe he equalized already before. You see, the queen has a nice retreating square if it's necessary, if it's needed. c3 takes, and now white even has a nice Alekhine in order to keep a central pawn. So this is what I meant with maybe beforehand when I said maybe black has an extra central pawn, but in order to keep his central pawn from the white's perspective, he needed to make an Alekhine in the center, and this is what I meant with black has a more flexible pawn structure, and this is because he has committed less central pawns, or less pawns in general. These pawn pushes are no real commitments, I think pawns are committed in unorthodox ways of moving them. Okay, but this game here now with the centralization of both sides is really an equal game. You can of course misplay, but this is again your private problem is if you misplay such positions. Objectively there's nothing for neither side. Now g3 in such a position might be a little commitment, but again black hasn't got firepower to attack himself. Takes, and well, the rating between these guys are quite different. Black is significantly stronger on master level, and exchanging of pieces is not the way to go for the opposite player, because you ease the position, you simplify it, and then the master knows better what to do. You need to really keep the pieces on, and your grandmaster opponent might have a bad day and you might win the tactics. But on this simplified position, black could make something of this maybe weakened pawn structure. But again, it's objectively equal. Queen here, queen here. Well, you see, by exchanging of queens, which white does, black gets even more control of central squares with pawns. Check and b5. Black is playing this endgame very nicely. You see the knight is a little bit unflexible. He's lacking squares. If he goes back, this square is denied, and I'm not sure where he's going from here. a4, a3, a5, knight back, king into the game. So this is important. Don't push your pawns without the backup of your pieces. Bring them all into the game. But with white's knight maneuver, I told you before the knight is lacking nice squares. White is giving black time to introduce his king very nicely into the center. And now you see the weakness of the isolani in the endgame. The isolani is weak. The more pieces are exchanged, the weaker it gets. In a middle game with many pieces on the board, it gives the isolani side more freedom of movement for the piece play. But in the endgame, if you have no pieces, this pawn is just unprotected. Now you see that black is getting strong on the second rank and very active. Check. The knight comes in between, and knight is rerouting to b4. Rook c5. Let's just drop back. Could there be a better move? What about b3, keeping the knight out of the game? Of course that's not possible because of the rook. So if king f4, then the pawn is falling. So white's position is already a little bit cramped and unflexible. So rook c5 seems to be the only active plan. White cannot see anything, but rook b3 covers the pawn and attacks white's b-pawn. So you saw that this pawn was attacked to gain some time, but now this pawn is attacked. So knight c4. If this knight is taken, well, it cannot be taken. The e3 knight is pinned. So a4 to undermine the black knight. And in this position, black took the b pawn. Let's just drop back. He could have taken on e3, but this is not easy to do because it's not that clear. And one of the best ways is just to take this, and now you can see that there are two pawns, so you have at least one pawn running down the board. Let's just drop back. Whenever this pawn and this pawn are in the mix, we play h5. So this pawn is pinned to the king, so king f4 and h5 simply, and the king cannot go to g5. h3, a3, takes. This would be a variation where you see that black would win this endgame if he would have taken the knight on e3. And in order not to get a draw by repetition, king c4 is good enough. And now you see, the more you look at this position, the more you see that it's very desperate for white. You see, g4, just exchanges of pawns, and now white has to take this pawn probably. And now king b4, attacking the rook. Rook takes pawn, king f4, and king b5. Black has protected everything, and this is a winning endgame. Let's just go on a little bit. Rook h3 to show that white is lacking moves. King e4 maybe, and then f5, a3, everything is protected. If king e4, simply check and check. And the difference between this endgame and the endgame of my last classical time control game is that white cannot sacrifice his rook in order to keep the black king on the edge of the board, because this rook is well coordinated with the black pawns, so the white king cannot infiltrate here anyhow, and this is why this endgame is lost, clearly. So let's get back to this position. Knight takes e3 would have been the way to go, but it's not very clear to see from this position. So black rather played another good move, and a3 here, a4 here, threatening a3. And again, this is a desperate position. White sees the pawn coming up, and what to do? The engine suggests check, and if king d7, king rook a6, well, it's not that easy, of course, but this is a way to go, I think, to keep some drawing chances. The engines like king c7, and then d5, pawn takes pawn, and the knight cannot capture it, so king f4 to capture the pawn later, and then we take this. We cannot take this, but this pawn, king b7, rook f6. Let's just drop back. There is no better move, but in this position now, with check and a3, Rook takes, king b6. It's clear that white cannot hold the a-pawn anymore. But this is again not easy to see from this position, and white got desperate. And he took this knight in order to hope to trap black. He checked on c4, forking king and rook. He took the rook, but after a3 and b6 check, well, black shouldn't take this pawn. If he would have taken that, then check wins the pawn, having a knight extra. So black played correct in playing king b8, and now this pawn cannot be stopped promoting, and this is why Claus Seyfried resigned to Gudmundur Kjartansson. I hope you enjoyed the game. Let's just recap it to see the thematic play. d6 attacking the e-pawn, and then we take on e5. We focus on e5 in defending our d knight, and afterwards exchanging off the e knight. Bishop out to play e6 anytime. g6 in this instant. Queen c8, connecting with the bishop, and then we develop and we look for a way to play c5 soon with good preparation. Takes e6, that keeps the knight there, and another retreat here, maybe then later here, in order to free up this pawn. Knight here, queen here, in order to get to f4 with the queen, and the three pieces in the center are not enough for white. And now the rook is indirectly posted against the white queen, and this is why, by attacking the rook with tempo, c5 is a very correct and thematic break in the center, which causes the white endgame problems by creating an isolani. That isolani is kept by blockading it and centralize your rook and freeing up this rook, maybe even here. So this move does several things in one go, a clear grandmaster way to think. Rook c8, again, to take is a mistake. Why should we take and allow white to get the pawn to e5? Then it would not be an isolani anymore. So queen h3, and now we simply exchange off the queens. There is nothing for either side to attack, but now the endgame is clearly the phase of the game where the grandmaster shows his strength and where the weaker player goes wrong. Well, in this position b4 maybe would have been stronger after exchanging. Then black has a pawn on b4, threatening to go here, and if the knight moves, then this pawn would drop, and the king cannot attack the rook because here the knight is covering that square. So let's go on. That was the game continuation, and white is moving back and forth, and in this position white tried this, but of course black saw white's idea and just moved out of the way, and white resigned. Please comment, subscribe, and like the video if you did. Thanks.